Have you been researching percussion pads online?
I know you're tired of seeing the ads generated by the algorithms.
Well, which one are you going to buy? There's so many to choose from.
I've told you I need to do lots of research. I wish there was a new video that gave the lowdown on all the main ones.
Thankfully, Bogey, there is. Hello, friends. How you doing today? This is a video that's going to be a little bit longer than usual, but that's because I plan on, and I will be, kind of giving my personal opinion on 6 of the main electronic percussion pads that are in the market now. I have owned all of these, and there's 2 that I have now. And so I'll kind of get into that later, why I've chosen those 2. I've done a lot of this through using the return system at the music store. So most music stores will give you 30, 45 days to try something, and then if you don't like it, you can return it and get a full refund. That being said, I'm going to touch upon the 6 pads. So each of these clips is going to include, videos of me performing, on them, and just little snippets, not nothing long, but you'll be able to see me playing the videos and recording them. So the Alesis Samplepad Pro is going to be first. So I've kind of put together a list of pros and cons. So the pros, right off the bat, this pad is super affordable. It's cheap. Okay, so you'll be able to pick this up with not spending a lot of money. I think it's like $350 now at this point, which is really, really not expensive at all for this kind of instrument. There's pretty decent sounds on it. I've found, I think there's only 200 sounds, but the sounds that are on it are pretty decent. Additionally, if you go to Alesis's website, you'll be able to download some more sounds and put them on the pad as well. There's lots of options as well for external triggers. I believe there are 2 ports that are for pads. One is dual trigger and one is single trigger. So right away, that's 3 ports for triggers. So you could have 3 separate triggers or 1 dual and 1 single. And you also have ports for hi-hat and bass drum. Now with the hi-hat and bass drum triggers on this, I was never able to figure out how to use an open-closed hi-hat on one defined pad. You can get it on 2 pads and use it on a mute group, and you can use the pedal to use the pedal to control the open hi-hat so it closes. But to get the closed hi-hat, you'd have to hit another pad. So although it has a hi-hat control, it's not going to be a real controlled hi-hat on one pad that you can use. The cons. There's lots of crosstalk with this machine. I was sort of able to figure it out, I think, after a while with adjusting the settings, as people have talked about. If you put the settings on the low side, I think it's a 2 or a 3, you were able to pretty much avoid crosstalk, but there was times where it was kind of unavoidable. So you'll need an SD card to be able to do all the advanced features, such as making your own user kits and saving everything. Yeah, the load times are slow, very slow. So, they're a little bit slower on some of the other pads that Alesis makes, but not nearly as slow as the Samplepad Pro. So those are some of the cons with it. So now we're going to move on to the Yamaha Multi12. This is a cool machine. It features 12 pads, 3 on the bottom, like our bottom rim pads, and 3 on the top rim pads. Then you have your 6 pads, main pads, that are in the middle of it. So all in all, it's 12 triggers that you have. You can put wave A and wave B on them. Then the sounds are excellent. So you can have a lot of sounds on all these pads, 2 per each. So, you're looking at it that way with just the pads itself, you can have 24 sounds. That's not including the triggers that are included on the back, which it does include 5 triggers, which includes a hi-hat control, which is nice to be able to have that. Those are the pros, okay? The cons, it just has poor triggering, believe it or not, with Yamaha pads. So when I've tried this with DTX8 or any of the rubber Yamaha pads, I was getting really weird crosstalk between the main unit and the pad itself. So it was hard to explain how it was so, what it was doing. But when I remember I tried to assign something, I hit the snare drum pad and it would go to pad 2 on the unit. And I was like really weird how that was working out. So that was obviously really frustrating. And then once you have that, the pads themselves aren't that sensitive. I was having a hard time getting a sound if I wasn't hitting it pretty much exactly in the pad, in the center of the pad, which was sort of annoying. And probably the thing that was the most frustrating about it was the fact that sampling on it was just really, really confusing. And just using the machine in general was confusing. I did own the pad for a couple of months, and it was like really hard to figure out the sampling, how to get the samples onto the unit. We're now going to move on to the Roland Spd Sx. So this is a very, very well-known machine. It's priced, pretty much, I'd say, right sort of in the middle of the pack with all the other pads. This machine is very, very easy to use, I will say that, and it's attractive. It looks nice. They have 2 different models. They have one that has more storage memory. That's the red one, the SE, I think, and they have the SX, which just has the regular, I think, 4 gigabytes of memory, whereas I think the SE has 16 gigabytes. So the main thing about it is that it's really easy to use. The bad things about it, the cons, it made the upper rims were really, really cheaply made, I think. So when I hit the upper rims, first of all, it didn't feel very, very comfortable to hit. And I had to really hit them very, very hard to get any kind of sound. So that was really frustrating. I found myself only trying to use the 3 pads. It has, dual trigger outputs for 4 triggers, so you can have 2 for each. Okay, so you can have up to 4 pads. Which was cool, and with one of the, even though it doesn't have a dedicated hi-hat controller, as in some of my videos before, you could use a piezo pad like a Yamaha KU100, and you can use that as like a hi-hat control, sort of. The problem with the way it was set up was when you'd hit the pads or roll on one pad, the trigger would stop if you hit another trigger. So if you'd be rolling on something, and then when you hit on something else, the sound would cut off. So I thought they actually fixed this in one of the bugs. I noticed that there was an update. I had the most modern version of it, and it didn't update it. So there was still that problem where it was cutting off other things that I was hitting with the external triggers. Now, for somebody who's a drummer, that's a bigger deal than somebody who's just using it as a sample pad and just something in addition to your acoustic drum set. But that's not how I use these machines. I use them as miniature drum kits, and for me that was a big problem. So I really wasn't a fan of that. Moving on to the Roland Spd 30 or Roland Octopad. This was a great build. This was built very, very well, the Roland Octopad. Quality, in terms of just the way it felt and everything, it felt really good. Editing, was excellent. There was lots of options and able to tune the drums, change the pitch. Those were really not options with the other ones before. In terms of this one, not to mention also muffling. You were also able to do, which are big things you can do: tuning, muffling, adding effects, and there's great external trigger options. So there was dedicated triggers, for hi-hat, for a hi-hat cymbal, and you could have a real standing hi-hat. for a snare drum, and it labels everything, you know, for you. So it was, in that way, it was really, really easy to use. The only issue, one of the big issues with it was that there's just no sampling. You can't sample anything. You can't bring in any sounds. There's nothing that you can do in terms of putting in more. So you're stuck with those, whatever it is, 670 sounds or something like that. I think there's just under 700 sounds on the Octopad, and you know, some of them were quite good, but I felt that I was kind of lost with not being able to bring in samples and things like that. As a drummer, you know, what I wanted to sample were obviously tunes that were drumless that I could drum along to, but also I wanted to sample drum sounds from the internet, you know, different snare sounds, different hi-hats, different toms, and this didn't allow me to do that. The Alesis Strike Multipad. This is great overall for a lot of things. This is great for really, really easy for sampling. The sounds on it are really good, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of sounds on the Alesis Strike Multipad. And the feel of the pads is the highlight for me. It's actually probably the only pad up to this point where I'd say that just playing it by itself, just the bass, by itself with no other external triggers, is the way to go with this thing. So in my opinion, this makes this great for a gig because you don't have to bring anything else other than a stand and your pedals. It has a hi-hat control pedal, which is awesome. So if you bring a hi-hat control pedal and not just a whole bulky stand or anything, you'd be fine. You could play the hi-hat on one of the pads and have a great hi-hat control, feels really good. And that's your gig for you because it, you know, like I said, it triggers really well, it loops great, it does a lot of looping, which is awesome. And for that reason, I think it's a great pad to bring on gigs. You know, a fabulous pad to bring on gigs. Con is the triggering. You know, this is why I can't really have it as my main kit at home, because when I want to use real drum pads or a hi-hat stand or anything with it, like a real hi-hat on a stand, you can't do it. It just feels weird. You know, like you can adjust settings and you can get it pretty close, you know, in general, but this is not great for external triggering. It's great on its own, but for external triggers, not so much. The Roland Spd Sx Pro is one of these power horse machines. It just does everything really, really well. It has amazing triggering with the external triggers. The sampling on it is very similar to the Spd Sx, like its predecessor, so that's really, really good. They've basically taken everything about the Spd Sx that was a problem, and they've pretty much fixed it and updated it. So again, it's great for external triggering. It's great pad sensitivity. It's very easy to navigate. Really, really good editing options. You can tune. You can use the decay, which is like muffling. Great option editing for waves. You can make and complete a standalone drum set from it, which I'm going to talk about, which is another great thing about it. And yeah, the only real con behind it is that it's very expensive, okay? But you have to look at it this way. Not only is it an excellent machine, the Spd Sx Pro, what I said earlier about making a standalone drum set, you can use the Spd Sx unit as a module, and you have 8 trigger outputs. There's 4 outputs, four triggering inputs that you can split. So that means you can have 8 single outputs going to 8 different pads. What that means essentially is that you can have a complete drum set just with the pads by itself, controlled by the Spd Sx Pro. But if I ever wanted to have a full drum set of just pads, this could act as the module alone for it. So that being said, that's why it's so expensive. And that's why it's going to be one of those things where it's going to be worth the money, I think, for you to buy this machine. In terms of all the other things, you don't have to use half of the features on it. You can use just some of the basic features, and it's a great pad just because of that. One of the other interesting things about the Pro was that the hi-hat is a little bit different in terms of how it's programmed. In terms of how they change the velocity of the up and down, that's pretty much the same thing. It's pretty standard for the pads for Roland. But they did notice that you have to assign the same close sound to the rim and to the bow area, the 2-zone cymbal for the VH10. Because if you hit the bow or hit the edge, you'll get no sound. So you have to assign both of those, and then you also have to assign both of them an open hi-hat. So you can have the same kind of mechanism, open-closed, for wherever you hit the cymbal. It was a little bit different for the Octopad. I seem to remember that you didn't have to worry about that at all. You just had to assign it to the bow, and then everything was taken care of. You didn't have to worry about the edge of the cymbal. For the VH10, it was all the same. But I guess what's good about it is that if you wanted to put a different sound onto the edge of the cymbal, you could. It doesn't have to be that way, whereas you didn't really have that option with the Spd 30. It just kind of did it for you. That's pretty much the only thing that's really, really different about it that I've noticed from the other Roland products. All right, so the burning question, which two do I still own? Well, I own now the Spd Sx Pro, and I'm going to be keeping the Alesis Strike Multipad. I just feel that I like playing both of those machines very much. I've learned enough about the Pro that I think that I'm going to enjoy it because it really takes all the simplicity from the Spd Sx and combines it with the Octopad in terms of having hi-hat control and me being able to use my drums and create a drum set from it, eventually if I want to. Not to mention having great sounds, editing features, all that. Whereas the Alesis Strike Multipad is just fun to play. It's fun to play on those pads. Now, you could argue that you could do the same with the Roland Spd Sx Pro and just kind of take it back and forth if you're going to use it at home with drum pads and then bring it with you on a gig with a hi-hat controller, like a little FD8 or whatever. You can do that as well. I think it's that good of a machine that you can use it for everything. But if you can own 2 different brands, you sort of know what you're going to get with the brands a little bit. For the most part, they both have kind of like they all kind of have like their little trademarks, little things that are signature, their company. So if you can have 2 different brands, I think that's the way to go. And again, you can try anything you want at most music stores and then return it. You know, you don't have to feel like you're, you know, this is it and that's all I can do and then I can't give it back. No, you can return something within the time period that it tells you. So make sure you're always reading, you know, the guidelines of your music stores and their policies of returns, because that was huge for me to be able to return stuff and you know, get my money back. That way I could use it for things that I wanted, you know, or to buy again. I really hope this video has been helpful to you guys. I want to wish you guys a great day, and thanks again for watching.